let's look at some of the impacts of tourism on society. Now, not only society, but also a little bit on the individual, and then we're going to check out the Iridex model. So the first thing is the effects of tourism on the individual is it helps to shorten the cultural distance between two different peoples. Hopefully what's happening is that by experiencing another people, another place, that ethnic or historical tourism or cultural tourism, that it brings us closer. It brings that peace, that prosperity that we talked about in Module 5 when we looked at the possible benefits of tourism worldwide. The amount that that's going to happen really depends on the kind of tourism activities that are occurring. So if someone goes to an all-inclusive resort, stays in the resort, never really leaves, and the only interaction they're getting with locals maybe is through as employees, then there's going to be less of a shortening of that cultural distance than if they're doing something, say, like life experience tourism, where they're really experiencing another person or another place. So the impacts on the individual really are going to depend on what they're doing once they get there. Now, from a societal standpoint, especially from the society that is the one that's providing the tourism, it can enhance understanding of foreigners, maybe for the good or for the bad, but can also have a better understanding of self and what we want out of it. And how well we do as a tourism structure is going to depend on the kinds of interactions we have between the tourist and the tourist attitudes and the place. And so this is where different groups have a large role on the impacts of tourism, because they need to manage the expectations of the tourist who's coming in and serve as a point where they can reference each other and have communication and dialogue. So some of the negative impacts of the social effects is one of racial tension between two different groups, causing by labeling. Maybe it actually increases cultural distance rather than shortening it because of different cultural choices that are made, different preferences, different ethical boundaries, whatever that is causing more tension between the group. It could also cause trinketization, where instead of creating local goods, they're now creating or making trinkets to sell to tourists. I would argue, though, that if that's what the tourist wants and it's bringing more income for the local community, that is not necessarily 100% of a negative thing, and that it just needs to, the trinketization should not lead to a loss of cultural pride, but as long as it is serving a function and purpose that is meaningful to both the people that are producing the trinkets and those who are consuming them, then there can be a positive outcome from that interaction that is occurring between the two people. It can lead to undesirable activities, again, depending on who you bring in as a tourist and what they look like. So, for example, the no-holds-barred tourism with sex tourism, yeah, that's a problem. It's going to have a negative impact on society. So what things we don't want crime, we don't want prostitution, we don't want drunkenness. So an example of this is Las Vegas. So Las Vegas and their destination branding of Sin City back in the early 80s was actually a really bad destination image because it brought a lot of these undesirable activities. It brought crime, it brought prostitution, it brought drunkenness, and they had to think of a way to rebrand themselves and become a better city and a better tourist destination to attract better people. They started including a lot more shows, better food, more than just the gambling and the games, and they became a destination, and they rebranded themselves from being Sin City to being what happens here stays here. And just that slight tweak, it still brought that little bit of risque, a little bit of on the edge, but in a safe way, in a way that more people are willing to have business meetings there, or conferences, or conventions, or other events, because they feel like, yes, it's a little edgy, but it is not undesirable activities. And then also there can be resentment towards tourists. We're going to look at this with the Iridex index. The inferiority complex, financial disconnects between the tourist, and the have-not, the people who live in the local area. And also it can lead to this demonstration effect. Now, one thing I want to point out is that this is not just in third world countries. And one of the reasons I brought in Las Vegas as an example of undesirable activities is this happens anywhere where tourism is brought in a way that is not conducive with local culture, local society, or there is an overabundance of tourism that it overwhelms the local community. So I have an article here, the Venice Tourism Debate of 2015, where they say there's so many tourists here now, it is just destroying our city. So this is a problem that can happen anywhere, no matter what level of income the locals have, because when tourists come, it changes the society, it changes culture. And so we want to make sure from an infrastructure and a planning perspective that we are doing it in a sustainable way, that we can cause positive benefits economically, socioculturally, as well as environmentally, and not destroy the landscape, the local culture, or even take away or have deleterious effects on the local economy. So that brings us to the Iridex model. This is the relationship between tourists and how the residents feel about the tourists coming in. And so the first stage of the Iridex model says euphoria. Great, we have this awesome new idea to bring in new economic gain. We're going to bring in tourists. We're going to welcome them. It's really exciting. We're just getting that first flavor of tourism coming in. We have a small number of visitors coming and limited commercial activity. There's only small changes that are morphing the environment around us. So we're really, really excited about it. Then we get into stage 2. All right, so we've been doing this for a little while now. The number of tourists is starting to increase. That traffic is increasing. The demand on resources is increasing. We're getting more than what maybe we really thought we wanted, but marketing is still amping up. We're still getting a lot more marketing because we're still trying to get more tourists into the location. So we're no longer really euphoric about it, but it's just part of life now. We now have these tourists that are coming in. Then we start to get annoyed in stage 3. So now we're getting so many tourists in, we're just feeling overwhelmed. We can no longer use our roads. We're no longer able to drive from point A to point B without wondering how bad the traffic's going to be today, or whether or not we can get into our favorite restaurant because it's overwhelmed with tourists who want to eat there, or any of the other small minutia that comes with it, because there's now a competition for resources between tourists and residents. And now we're starting to have concerns that we're seeing maybe some of those deleterious effects. Maybe we're seeing a little uptick in crime. Maybe we're seeing some more problems that are happening because of the interactions between locals and tourists. So we're starting to hit that saturation point. We're like, oh, we don't have enough infrastructure to really handle the amount of tourists we have. Which brings us to the final stage, was antagonism. No longer am I just annoyed by the tourists. I want them to go away. I want to tell them to go away. I maybe even leave myself during peak tourism season because I just can't handle the amount of tourists that are coming to our area, and there's this open hostility between the locals and the tourists. Now, the interesting thing is that you can have all of these levels of the index at the same time, because someone new moving into the area maybe is starting over at the euphoria stage because this is all new to them. They're part of the problem. And then you can have people at the same time who are already hitting that antagonistic stage. Now, if you look at this, the irritation index, we're going to partner that with the resident strategy of how to handle where they are in the index. We see that if you're in euphoria, you're embracing tourism, you're really excited about it, this is what you want. Once you get to that apathetic stage, you're tolerating it, it's not really exciting for you, you're not really embracing it, but okay, fine, it is what it is, it's part of the acceptance of it. Annoyance, you start to adjust. Okay, maybe I need to change my behaviors. Maybe I don't go out during these certain times. Maybe I don't eat at those restaurants anymore. Maybe I don't go to the tourist attractions. I'm just going to adjust my life because I'm so frustrated and annoyed with the amount of tourism that exists here. And then that final stage, that antagonism, I'm going to completely withdraw because I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of tourists and the impact it's having on society that I'm going to withdraw from the process. Or actively be openly hostile towards the tourists that are coming here. So if you want to be in the tourism field and you want to work in tourism, this is also an area you can look at, is that planning and development of communities and the infrastructure, so that you can hopefully prevent your community from getting into these final stages of the Iridex model, and hopefully have a positive outcome, a sustainable outcome from the tourism endeavors that you are producing for your community.